Good morning. It is Monday, the 9th of February. I'm Maeve McMahon and this is Europe Today. Your daily dose of European news and analysis live here on Euronews. Coming up, the Winter Olympics in Milan Cortina are well and truly underway after a remarkable opening ceremony. But politics has inevitably trickled into the Games. Despite organisers' efforts to keep sport separate from current affairs, opposition to President Trump's policies, both at home and abroad, has been on clear display. For more on the significance of this, our EU News editor, Maria Tadeo, joins me here in the studio. Good morning, Maria. So look, a spectacular opening ceremony, but also very political.
Yes, and look, ultimately, the Olympics is still one of those big global events that can still bring a big audience, right? There's a good feel around it. It's obviously the athletes, the effort, the discipline that goes into it. A ceremony that was indeed very beautiful, very Italian in a way, very different to Paris, certainly more traditional. There's this idea that Italians like about themselves, and they like to export that to the world. It's obviously the colors, the people, the food, the clothes, of course, it's the fashion that were uniforms by the late Giorgio Armani, but it was also very political because a U.S. delegation led by J.D. Vance was in Milan Cortina. They took a meeting with Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. J.D. Vance, by the way, he was booed on the stands at the San Siro Stadium. Team USA walked out. A camera showed him, and the stadium, you could really hear the boos. And Maeve, at some point, I guess, when you call your allies, weak, decaying, you say they're facing civilization erasure, at some point you're going to encounter the real life pushback. And that was very clear on the cameras that day. And beyond, of course, J.D. Vance, there were protests all along the weekend. We saw some spectacular images, which hopefully we can put up on the screen. Clashes between protesters and the police. Those are stones, fireworks. There's a sort of a collusion of issues here. Some are protesting what they think will be a Winter Olympics that will not really bring any benefits to Milan. There's a cost of living. We also knew in anticipation to the Games that they were protests to what was perceived as Trump policies, and there was a controversy as to whether or not ICE was going to participate. The Italian government insisting that they will handle the bulk of the security. And on that note, Giorgia Meloni yesterday put out a statement, some words on social media, heavy-worded statement saying there are many Italians who are working around the clock to show a very beautiful image of Italy, but then there are them, and those are the enemies of Italy and Italians demonstrating against the Olympics and ensuring that these images, of course, the protests that we just saw are broadcast on television screens around the world and really dampen the Winter Olympics. This has created another controversy in the country, some suggesting that the idea of enemies of Italy and Italians, that is simply too much. The opposition saying that this is really about curtailing freedom of speech. And we should also note that in the run-up to the Winter Olympics, the Italian government approved a decree that allows for stricter security. So yes, there are the Games, and we love to see those, but certainly there is politics. It's never just about the sports.
It never is. A lot to talk us through there, Maria Tadeo. And just this week, looking ahead here in Brussels, a big one for diplomacy. We've got the EU Leaders Retreat taking place and also the Munich Security Council.
Yeah, absolutely. So an informal retreat will happen on Thursday. It's about competitiveness and how to improve the European economy. The focus is very much on the Mario Draghi and Letta report. Remember, they talked about how to reform the single market. Mario Draghi has been very present in the European public space and debate. He's now talking about this idea of a, quote, very pragmatic federal union. But remember, the idea of a federal Europe, it's always been a toxic term for some who say, look, the EU is not a federation and it was never intended to work like that. And then we have the Munich Security Conference. This time around, there's a lot of secrecy around the agenda, but we understand J.D. Vance will not be addressing the Munich Security Conference. It will be Marco Rubio. Remember, last year, that really ruffled feathers. He talked about the idea of a woke Europe, the climate, Greta, the migrants, and so on. This time, it seems just by the headliners of this U.S. delegation that it could probably opt for a more diplomatic approach.
OK, Maria Tadeo, thank you so much for that. And of course, you'll be in Munich covering that for us, that conference. But coming up, we'll be joined by the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas. The former Prime Minister of Estonia also previously served as a member of the European Parliament, and she now holds the EU's most senior diplomatic role. Executive Vice President Kallas, good morning. Great to have you with us this morning in the studio.
Good morning.
Look, did you see those images first of US Vice President being booed at the Games? What does this all say about the EU-US bond?
Well, I guess we have heard a lot of not so nice words from United States regarding Europe. And of course, our public also has a pride, European pride, so it shows.
But it will be an intense Munich Security Council.
Yes, it will. I think we have a lot of things going on in the world, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Ukraine. There are a lot of tensions all around the world, so definitely we're going to have good discussions.
Well, on those tensions, let's first talk about the talks in Abu Dhabi, the US-led talks. Have you any trust in them?
Well, we haven't seen Russia really taking the talk seriously because, while Ukraine already agreed to unconditional ceasefire over a year ago, then Russia keeps on bombing. I mean, just yesterday we heard how they're bombing civilian infrastructure all the time. Plus, they don't really have serious people, behind that table. So I don't expect anything out of this, really.
So do you trust the Americans to lead these talks?
Well, the Americans have been bringing together the Russians and the Ukrainians, but eventually it's also clear that we haven't seen any concessions on the Russian side. We only have seen what Ukrainians are willing to concede in order to end this war. But if you look at the bigger picture, then, Russia is the problem that has been attacking its neighbors for over, 100 years already. So in order to stop the war and prevent the war from expanding, we should have concessions on the Russian side.
And are you concerned now that the Ukrainians might have to give up territory if there's no Europeans around those tables?
Well, it is up to Ukrainians to decide what kind of concessions they are willing to make. And of course, every war ends in, compromise or on concessions. But we have to understand how the Russian negotiation tactic is. It's always to, demand something, absolute maximum, something that has never been yours, and then present threats, ultimatums, use force. And then eventually there will always be people in the West who will offer you something so that you walk away with more than you had. And we have to keep this in mind because, the size of the Ukrainian army is not the problem because they haven't attacked Russia. The size of Russian army is a problem for all its neighbors. The size of Russian military budget is a problem for all. So we really need to see what kind of concessions are they willing to make.
And just when it comes to the diplomatic efforts to end the war, what about an EU envoy? Do you support the idea of sending an EU envoy, someone who can directly talk to Vladimir Putin?
Well, we have always talked to the Russians, but the point right now is not the person who does it, but more like how and what we want to get out of this. Right now, we see the picture where, the Russians seem to be having this Alaska understanding with the Americans, so they wait the Americans also to deliver by diplomatic means the things that they haven't really achieved militarily. If you think about the whole of Donbass that they are still, demanding. Now, if we want to go to the table, so it's not that we can offer something on top of it because Ukraine has already made a lot of concessions. So
you're against this idea of the
No. The question is what we want to achieve. And what I say, it's not about the person, but it's actually to really have concessions from the Russian side. But so far, if the Russians are thinking that they are getting their maximum, goals from the Americans, why should they want to talk to the Europeans? Because we will only make demands for them. So that's why we have to work on our efforts to really put them in a position where they would go from pretending to negotiate to actually negotiate, which means the possession of strength.
Okay, and just on Iran, we were following those talks carefully that took place on Friday in Oman. What is your view here? And do you think the EU has been doing enough as well to help Iranian civil society?
Well, yes, we have supported Iranian civil society and of course, the Iranian people as much as possible. Also, we have had diplomatic outreach and talks to the Iranians because we have a lot of worries. I mean, nuclear program, ballistic missile program, also their detention of European citizens is a problem for us. So we clearly want to have a diplomatic solution for this, because the region does not need another war.
But again, here it's the Americans leading, and of course the Americans had the talks on Friday. Do you have any faith in the Americans?
Well, of course, the Americans, the Iranians have to also agree, because it's the American military threat that is hanging over the region. So that's why, this is something that they need to come to a solution.
But do you feel like you're always looking kind of on, observing from a distance?
No, we have been in contact with them and also, negotiating on. But it is clear that some ways, considering the military power that US has, they have more leverage. When it comes to European military power, then we are still building it.
We are indeed. That's, of course, a big challenge for people here in Brussels. Kaja Kallas, thank you so much for being our guest this morning on Europe Today and coming up to speak to us. We hope to see you again soon. But now it is time to turn our attention to Portugal, where devastating storms have overshadowed a highly anticipated presidential election this weekend. Severe flooding and fierce wind has turned off the power supply to thousands and seen a number of people lose their lives. Despite the disruptive weather and travel complications, turnout was high, though, for the second round of the presidential elections. Our correspondent in Lisbon, Joana Mourão Carvalho, sent us this update on the outcome.
Foi uma noite de grande festa aqui nas Caldas da Rainha, sem surpresas. António José Seguro foi eleito Presidente da República.
It was a night of great celebration here in Caldas da Rainha. Unsurprisingly, António José Seguro was elected President of the Republic with almost 67% of the votes. Also tonight, history was made. Seguro is the first socialist president in 20 years, after Jorge Sampaio left office in 2006. Seguro also went over the 3 million vote mark, making him the most voted candidate in presidential elections. In his victory speech, Seguro promised to be a demanding and vigilant president, but never a counterweight. Prime Minister Luís Montenegro, who also reacted to the results, said that cooperation and partnership with Seguro will ensure political stability in the country.
Que a cooperação e a parceria com Seguro irão garantir a estabilidade política no país.
And for more on the outcome there in Portugal, do visit our website, Euronews.com, or of course download our app. But now, Jakob Jannes has been looking into some interesting data about the amount of money in our pockets since the COVID-19 pandemic. Take a look.
Europeans are getting richer, and since the pandemic, real household income has jumped by about 7%. But if you look closely at the map, you realize this isn't a shared meal, it is a very unequal dinner party. And right now, the East is ordering seconds. Poland, Romania, Hungary and Croatia are feasting, with their real incomes growing by around 15 to 20% in just 5 years. Meanwhile, the North is on a diet. Sweden, Finland and Denmark have barely touched their food, stuck with almost zero growth. And even the heavy eaters like Germany and Italy are just picking at their plates. Real household income is what you can actually swallow after taxes and inflation. And in the North, high prices ate up the entire meal. That is not the case in the east of Europe, where wages grew fast enough to beat the bill. But hold on, before you feel sorry for the West, remember, portion sizes are still very different. Citizens in Luxembourg and Germany still have the biggest plates in Europe, with purchasing power nearly 5 times higher than in Bulgaria. Or, in simple words, look at this avocado index. In Luxembourg, an hour of work buys you enough avocados for a party-sized bowl of guacamole, and in Bulgaria, just a small dip. But if you are not a stereotypical millennial who, a friendly reminder, is now in their mid-30s and probably due for a colonoscopy soon, maybe pick a tomato instead. Because, let's be honest, at least the tomatoes in Sofia actually taste like tomatoes.
Jakob Jannes there for us. But now stay with us, as coming up we'll be joined by Mitra Hejazipur. The Iranian-French chess grandmaster is the winner of the Iranian Women's Championship, but actually got expelled back in 2020 for not wearing a hijab. She's also since written a book called The Chess Player. Mitra, welcome to Euronews. Great to have you on Europe Today. I think it's the first time we had one of the greatest chess players in the world on our set, so lovely to have you with us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And of course, earlier we had Kaja Kallas here, the Foreign Affairs Chief of the European Union. We were speaking to her about the situation in Iran. It's obviously very close to you. Can you just bring us up to speed, remind our viewers now what the situation on the ground is like since the brutal crackdown a few weeks ago, and how are your friends and family doing?
Yeah, actually, the new wave of protests in Iran started from 28 December, and there were millions of Iranians took the streets and they were chanting death to dictator, and they were calling the return of Reza Pahlavi. Actually, he is the main alternative after the collapse of the regime, and he's a legitimate leader for the transition phase, and he wants to establish a democratic system in Iran after the collapse of the regime. And based on the videos and testimonies that comes out of Iran, it shows that it was a bloody massacre, and it was a brutal repression. They killed almost more than 30,000 of Iranians. They used the military weapons, and we saw that they used the snipers on the rooftops. They aim the head of people. There are thousands of corpses on the streets. The people are looking for their victims. They are charged to money for the bullets. They killed their loved ones.
And meanwhile, President Trump had promised people that the help was on the way and encouraged people to take to the streets, but then was missing in action. How are people feeling now about President Trump's various calls?
Yes, actually, as you mentioned, Trump said that the help is on the way, and based off the videos and testimonies, the people of Iran, they ask for this help, and they hope to have this help in this intervention, this military intervention. Actually, if the international community stays in inaction, then the regime will continue this massacre, and there are the thousands of political prisoners that they are sentenced to death penalties, and and any kind of negotiation with this regime is condemned to a dead-end situation, and any kind of deal with this regime it shows it could be interpreted as a sign of weakness of Trump. So I think the people of Iran ask for this help, and we are still waiting.
And what kind of help do you want? Do you want a military intervention? Would people support this kind of military intervention that Trump is proposing?
Yes, the majority of the Iranian people, they support the military intervention. As we saw, it was a bloody massacre. So without military intervention, they will continue to massacre the people. And we hope that it comes from United States.
So that's the Americans. But what about the Europeans? Of course, we're in Brussels. You're in Brussels today speaking to us here. Do you feel that the EU has done sufficient for the Iranian people?
I think we did not have enough support from international community. At least I live in France. I didn't see this enough support from European countries. We saw that. Actually, next week there will be huge demonstrations in Munich, Los Angeles, and Toronto. So we will see the Iranian community out of Iran to support, to show the solidarity with the people of Iran.
So what would your message be to Europeans, to our viewers watching today, and also to Kaja Kallas, the EU Foreign Affairs Chief, and to EU heads of state and government?
We need more support for the intervention militaries. We need to fire, to expel the Iranian diplomats, because they are the criminals, and also to recognize Reza Pahlavi as a main figure of opposition, because he is legitimate, and the people of Iran, they chanted his name in four corners of Iran. So we need more support to.
Okay, Mitra, thank you so much for coming in to us today and speaking to us here on Europe Today. Mitra Hejazipour there, famous Iranian-French chess player. But that does bring this edition of Europe Today to an end. Thank you so much for your company. As always, you can visit Euronews.com if you need more news, more analysis and more context on any of the stories we're covering for free here. But thank you so much again for tuning in. Take care. Goodbye from Brussels.